Polo. Bonjour, Polo.
Hey, Marco.
How are you?
Bonjour. How are you? Very well.
Everything okay?
Looks perfect in the cellar.
But on the back, you have the light. And on the front, you have the light.
Wonderful.
So so tell me when you want to start.
Let's get a few more people on, and then we can start.
You are in the cellar of white wines here. I thought it was a good idea to make the tasting here.
And it's just behind the tasting room, right?
Yeah, if you want to see the tasting room, it's just here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is Eric here as well or not?
Sorry?
Is Eric here as well, or is he out in the vineyards?
He will come back later. It's lunchtime here.
All right. So have you had lunch?
Yeah. No. I
No
have
lunch
to
yet.
off my body, you know. To be honest, no, Eric, since yesterday was in the vineyards because we have a big team. It was 38 people in the vineyards for 2 months for all the works, and now we finish what we call the accolage. So all the
Accolage is what?
Vineyards are controlled by the wires.
Oh, okay.
It's in order to protect, to have a better leaf exposure and better maturity, and also avoiding any damage to the vineyards when you make, for example, you plow or you are going to make some works in the vineyards, for example.
Okay, I'm gonna switch on a nice photo and then you can start talking. Let's see. You sent me some lovely pictures yesterday.
Exactly.
La. We can start with this one, shall we?
Yeah.
So people know we're talking about you.
But the people are going to visit our estate, they will find exactly this entrance. So to explain this, it's a new winery, and this was built in 2001. The first vintage we made here in Meursault in this cellar was 2002. The same year, then Éric Germain, the winemaker up today, joined the Vincent Girardin estate. And today he's a winemaker and regisseur of the estate.
Perfect.
To explain, you want to explain a little bit the story of the estate, Polo?
Yes, please.
So, in few words, the estate was built not in Meursault, but in Santonnet by Vincent Girardin. And we were in the beginning of the 80s, 82. And he starts with red wines in Santonnet. The thing, he has a lot of success at the beginning of his story in the building himself and being independent, apart his family. And he soon, with the style of the wine, he faced a certain demand on the market. He started using a lot of oak for the red. A big development was in the 90s when the share of white wine increased a lot. And at that time, he built up his négoce activity. But very important to explain, today I will explain that later on in order to be on the scale of history. When he built up the négoce activity in the 90s, it was a négoce activity based on buying grapes. So the idea was to control all the manufacturing, the production of the wine from the grape to the wine, and bring his own style. And the style of the wine in the 90s was a little bit what we were founding in Chardonnay style all over the world, was this big oaky Chardonnay, extracted, steering the lees, a good maturity. And it was a little bit the fashion of these oaky big Chardonnays, which is totally not the case today with the evolution of the style brought by Éric Germain. So to explain, 90s was this style. 2000 was also a success story about Vincent buying back an estate. And we can say at the end of 2009, the estate represents 20 hectares. It was right at that point that Vincent Girardin wanted to sell the estate. And in 2012, he sold the estate to the Compagnie des Vins d'Autrefois in Beaune, which president is Jean-Pierre Nier. And this Compagnie des Vins d'Autrefois proposed to Eric and myself, we were already on the estate, to take the control managing of the estate. So Eric became regisseur, taking care of all the technical side, vineyards and winery, and myself keep my previous mission to take care of all the sales. We became partner with Eric, and today we run the estate and the négoce activity. Today we build up the estate, so we are running now 33 hectares, and half of the 33 hectares, almost 15 hectares, we can say to be precise, are in Meursault. So 5 Premier Cru in Meursault, 4 in whites, Blagny, Genévrière, Charme-Dessus, we are going to taste today, and Perrières. The 5th one is a red, is Volnay-Santonneau, but it's located in the Meursault territory, even being with appellation Volnay and Santonneau. And after almost 10, to be precise, 9 different climate of village, which the most known is Narvaux, but we are also in Tesson, Vireuil, Castet, Corbin, Cromin, Charon, Tillet, Vireuil. So all those are the basement of the estate today. After second village where we are strong is Chassagne-Montrachet with more than 4 hectares. Then come Volnay, very important for us. We invest a lot in Volnay and Pommard. Perhaps at the wrong time, because when we buy the land, we were crushed down by hail and frost during 5 years. So it was perhaps a bad investment at the beginning, but very happy to have these vineyards today, because we are running one of the great appellations like Champagne in Volnay, Piture in Volnay, Santonneau, I already talked about that. After we are in Pommard, with Pommard village, Vaumurien and Amaro, and then Puligny, which is a tiny part of Puligny with 2 hectares, and then Saint-Romain, also very important nowadays in our portfolio. On top of that, we have contract with growers, and we buy almost 40 hectares in grapes, all processed here in Meursault. So the history today, to explain a little bit, the style has a big evolution. For the people who know our wine since 20 years, they notice this evolution from a very opulent, front-ward, rich wine. We came back to a wine which is very transparent, talking about the terroir. The idea of Eric, coming from the estate Henri Germain, from those who know this estate, Henri Germain is a very small estate, and is ranked among the top estate as the level of Coche-Dury, Comte-Lafon. Very known for his charm, for example, of the brother of Eric in charge of the estate. And Eric brought the style of his father, which is very elegant wine, not extracted. So we came back to, we can say, the tradition. So we harvest the parcel by hand. For the white, I'm explaining, for the white, harvest by hand, press, a strong press, because we like the bitterness in the wines. After we do a cold settling, very short, 1 day, and then put the juice in barrels, natural fermentation with natural yeast, no stirring of the lees, no racking. We really let the wine on the lees for 2 winters. So now you are on the white wine cellar where we have the fermentation and aging, and all those barrels will be moved to the red wine cellar, which is colder because now the malolactic fermentation finished. So we can move the cellar to a colder cellar for the second winter, which is the cellar of red wines. So coming back to the whites, after the aging racked, We work with a moon calendar, so all the racking, filtration, fining, all those things are done following the moon calendar. So fruit days for all the village and Bourgogne Blanc regional wine, and after for Premier Cru, Grand Cru, all in root days. The same we do for the reds, for example. All the parcels of the estate, the 33 parcels, are in conversion organic and biodynamic. We start just after the harvest 2019, but that was already settled in 2016 in all the parcels. What to say more, the style of the wines that you will taste today and you will discover on the time, it's to have in the glass the typicity of each terroir. We have the chance here in Burgundy to have a specific geological formation. It's not a young land. Here we are talking about 160 million years old limestone rock creation. It's younger than the Côte de Nuit. The Côte de Nuit, we are at 140, 150 million years ago. Sorry, the contrary, 140, 150 years ago from Côte de Beaune, and Côte de Nuit is 170 million years ago. Coming back for Côte de Beaune, it's younger chalk, and if we start with the Santo Marchatonniere, it will be a pure example of a limestone rocky soil. So coming back to the wines, the idea is to have no extraction, no print of the winemaking process. The idea is to have in your glass what can be the appellation you will find in the area. So I don't know if you agree, if you have questions or things, but we can start to taste with the Chatonniere, for example.
While you open your bottle, I just want to ask a question. So you said there are 30, how many hectares? 33?
33 today.
How many are under your own under your ownership, and how much are leased?
Own property, it's 14 hectares, and 19 hectares are contract.
And those contract, it means that you are leasing, but you're also doing the farming?
Yeah, we farm, we do all the thing, we harvest, we are in charge of the vineyards. So it's part of the estate.
Right, okay. And you're still looking for more, or 33 is sort of the right numbers now?
But it's the right number. What we wanted to do, increasing the estate, is to have a control on all the village Premier Cru, Grand Cru appellation. In terms of, except Bienvenue, which is we buy in grapes, and it's done in biodynamic viticulture. The Bâtard is bought in grapes too. The Chevalier also. We don't run the vineyards, and the Canton Charlemagne. But all the Premier Cru and top villages are run by us. The idea was to really control this sourcing. After, for Bourgogne, etc., we buy in grapes with growers that we know they are working well. But for all those prestigious appellations, we wanted really to have the control of the farming.
Okay. So what's the percentage of white versus red now in the?
Today we are talking about 65% white. Even now it's almost 60% because we took some parcel of Saint-Romain in red that increase. We can talk about 60% white, 40% reds today. And for the reds, we are covering Santonnet, Savigny-les-Beaunes that are bought in grapes, and after Volnay-Pommard, our vineyards, Saint-Romain, our vineyards, and after in Savigny-les-Beaunes, as I explained, bought in grapes, and Corton-Perrières that we are buying in grapes too.
Okay. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. Marco will be happy to answer them. So today we're tasting the first wine, the Santo Marchatonniere. Can you tell us a little bit about this vineyard?
Now, Santo Marchatonniere, it's 17, so we will start with the 17 vintage, just to explain a little bit. It's a vintage, the earliest one we are going to test today in terms of timing of harvesting. It was a very difficult spring. After we had, by chance, a good end summer, and we start to harvest. It was mid-August, so it's, we can say, earlier vintage. In terms of style of wine, I always consider the 17 white as one of the great vintage in the last vintage. Why? Because here you have very a traditional vintage in terms of classical, a lot of elegance, a lot of purity, a lot of freshness. We will test after the 16 where you will have a certain richness that you will not find in the 17, for example. 17, we can say you have a proper, it's like the mirror of the terroir in your glass. Coming to Santo Marchatonniere, here we are, it's a vineyard which is located on the top of the hill. We are very high. Here we are 300 meters high, and the soil is white like the label. It's limestone rock, it's white like a white pepper. So it will be one of the poorest soil where we are growing vineyards here. Chatonniere is just a touch to Rémy, but contrary to Rémy, here you have a large share on southwest exposure. It's high on the hill, but with a southwest exposure. So here the fermentation took place in 500-liter barrels, not in the 228-liter barrels, because for those appellations, using a bigger content, we keep even more the fruitiness and the freshness of the wines. So fermented in those 500-liter barrels, no stirring of the lees as I explained, then no racking, and we let the wine here, it's 14 months in barrels. Only 15% new oak, 15%, and then it's a natural fining, so casein and bentonite. So we use a milk protein. So for all those are attending the tasting, it's not vegan wines because we are using this milk protein, which is a natural product. But today it's always important to explain also all the things. So those natural fining is followed by a natural filtration, which is a clay Kissel-Gur filtration, and then bottled. So coming to the wine, the global terroir climate en Chatonniere represent almost 8 hectares, and here we are only in half hectares in production for this wine.
Quite a few of your famous neighbors are in Chatonniere. I mean, it's how would you rate it amongst the Premier Cru in Saint-Aubin?
I will talk. It's amongst one of the top with Rémy, with Merger des Dents de Chien. We can say those are the following of. You have to think you are on the top of the hill above all the Grand Cru. The Puligny-Shanguin became, the continuity is Merger des Dents de Chien, then is Rémy, and then you have, with the orientation turning, you have Chatonniere. So we can say here it's one of the best territory of Saint-Aubin.
You said this is southwest or southeast facing exposure?
Your southeast, sorry, southeast orientation.
Okay.
But with much more on the south. We can say it's a real southeast orientation. On the nose, you will find always a lot of like stony, like flint on the nose. You have a lot of citrusy taste.
There's a question asking whether the west-facing vineyards are becoming more favorable because of global warming. What do you think?
For example, if you look what is happening, like in the hill of Corton, with all the Pernon-Vergelès side, because you have a lot of west orientation, I will say you have better maturity nowadays. in a certain way. So when it was difficult 10, 15 years ago, today, every year it's matured. But that is not the case. In the West territory nowadays, you reach better maturity in a certain way. But this is not the case of this wine, because this wine was always in a good
Southeast.
For those who are tasting this wine, it's much more, we are talking about elegance, purity, but also length. It's a very delicate wine, very pure on this citrusy, but white fruit, and this salinity. It opens the taste buds. It's really a gastronomic wine. Here you can pair with seafood, fish. I think raw fish, a lot, I will like it. For example, on oysters, for example, or if you like sushi, for example. But really plays very well, at my opinion, with a lot of ginger. If you like to play spice, this one plays very well with that. You feel a little bit the aging on the front nose, but that on the mouth is totally transparent.
I think it's quite useful. I mean, it'll benefit from a little bit more aging, right? Would you even decant this wine?
Alors, for me, all the whites are, I will not say that all the whites, but the Chardonnay like oxygen.
Yeah.
It's the contrary from the Pinot Noir. If you put that in a carafe and after bring to the service, it will help the wine to develop even more his profile, his spectrum of aromatics at all. You have to think that the Chardonnay, it's one of the varietal that after aging in bottle is very helpful for the wine to open, to really decant it softly, but decant the wine. It's important.
Yeah, yeah. How old are the vines here at Chatonniere?
Here we are talking about roughly a little bit more than, because it was replaced, it's an average of 55 years old here in this parcel. So it's
55.
not a very old, but it's not a young vineyard. Here the idea with this kind of age of vineyards, we have a good deep rooting, so we have a real profile of the climate. Here you taste, it's like you lick a chalk stone. The effect on your mouth is exactly that on your tongue. So imagine you bring after oysters, because you have to think that, just for you, geologically, why Burgundy and Côte de Beaune is so unique, because we have the chance to have a slope, a hill, which is a formation of former tropical sea. Sedimentation of coral, sedimentation of all this life, because it was a warm sea, so a lot of shellfish, a lot of fish, and that makes the sedimentation, and our wines are based on those Jurassic soil. To explain, here in Côte de Beaune, we are in the high Jurassic superior, which is 170, 160 million years. It's the same time that you have the appearance in this world of the birds, of the flowers. You know, with the confinement, with the coronavirus, everybody start to hear birds, start to look about flowers, but all those elements were created when the soil of the wine we are drinking now today was created at the same time. Côte de Nuit, for example, it's older soil, and those soil were created when this unique continent, the Pangaea, start to divide. So when they start to divide, it was the same time the rock formation of the soil of Côte de Nuit, which is a little bit older than our soil in Côte de Beaune.
And what about the droppings from dinosaurs? Any help from the dinosaurs?
No, here it's too. They are away now. The only dinosaurs that you find, it's ourselves. When we are happy, you know. Now, coming back to that, so you have very old soil, and the chance we had in Burgundy is this breakdown of the soil. So 30 million years ago, you had like a lifting down of the soil that makes appear all the layers of chalk. And here we have the mother rocks. Our vineyards are based on very old limestone mother rocks, which will not be the case in a lot of other regions where your vineyards are based on much more younger soil. Bed of seas, for example, or even older soil, but the older ones are the metamorphic soil. If you are in granite, schist, for example, but when you talk about limestone or stone, we are one of the vineyards based on very old limestone rocks. Now we can test the Meursault, perhaps. What do you think?
You want to go to the Meursault first or the Puligny?
But myself, I will follow the vintage. After it was a term of appellation, but we can go to the Puligny, which is our Puligny Pucelle 16. Just to explain a little bit about vintages, you heard about the problematic of vintage with weather, storm, hail, frost, and that started in 2012 with a lot of difficulties of the flowering. And in 13, we had, I will talk about that later on, but talking about frost, 2016 of the Puligny Pucelle was a vintage in one night. It was end April. We have a big frost. We destroyed almost 50 to 90% of our harvest. 16, except this point of frost, it's incredible vintage, concentration. You have not a lot of surviving grapes on the vineyards. So you will have, in the 60s, a lot of, I will not say over rich wine like you can find in some 2005, 15, for example. 16, it's a 15, but much more balanced in a certain way. We are tasting a white wine. For me, 16 red. Not a lot of people are talking about the red of 16, but are one of the best red vintage in our region. You have the concentration, but you have a very good balance with acidity. It will be wine that will have a big, long aging potential.
Is that for both Côte de Beaune and Côte de Nuit, would you say?
For both. Even after Côte de Nuit, of course, being on other type of soil, having some oak cluster, richness, sort of techniques, you will have large aging potential in both regions. But coming back to the Puligny Pucelle, here we are testing one of the top premier cru of Puligny. Puligny Pucelle is a parcel of, it's not a big parcel. Here we are a little bit less than 7 hectares in total, including Le Clos de Mex and Les Pucelles, which is all the climate Les Pucelles. And here we are just attached to Bienvenue Bâtard Montrachet. Soil, here we have a lot of clay, red clay, but mixed with stones, which bring a certain richness, front palate, a little bit velvety, and after you have the purity of the Puligny wine. Les Pucelles, a lot of people talk about the virgins. You have beautiful stories about the daughter of the knight of Puligny, give it in inheritance and give the name of Pucelle, which means virgins. Normally, the name comes from the hierarchy, the Middle Age hierarchy. On the top, you have Montrachet. After, you have, on the top, you have Chevalier, which was a knight, the most important order in Middle Age. And after, you have Le Montrachet. Under, you have the Bastard. Linked to the Bastard, you have the Bienvenue. And after, you have Les Pucelles, virgins. And I think that the name is more coming from this hierarchy position on the hill. Here we are at 250 meters high, which is a little bit lower altitude compared to the Saint-Aubin. And here we are on a proper east orientation, east, southeast, but really much more east orientation. Fermentation in 228-liter barrels, of course, so same technique, harvest by hand, press, then cold settling of 1 day, and after we move the wine, the juice in barrels, 228-liter barrels, and here, like the Santo Marchatonniere and like all the whites we are producing today, here it's 15% New Oak barrels.
15.
So the share of New Oak is very
1.5.
1.5. The idea, and if you talk with Eric, and it's my point of view too, we make wine with grapes and not with oak. Oak must be considered like a content where you can make this micro-oxygenation mechanically through the pores of the barrels, through the wood, but the idea is that the wood must not cover the fruit. First, you have the fruit that describes the origin of the fruit, the terroir, the climate, and of course, you must find that back in the glass.
But for Grand Cru, you're also with 15%?
Exactly. We totally reduced in the past years the amount of New Oak, even on the Grand Cru, which is very strange because we moved from 10 months with a lot of New Oak, 50 to 80%, and we moved back in the past 10 years, we can say, now it's even more. We changed 13 years ago, 2006, we are testing a 16, but 2006 was really the first vintage when we decreased the amount of New Oak. Eric started to really cover the idea of making the wine in his proper vision. And we can say today the thing, we are having longer aging, 2 winters, but less New Oak. That costs a lot of money because you have to have 2 settles of barrels, the vintage of the year and the vintage of last year. So it took a few years in order to invest in barrels. And nowadays we are in the good, we can say the good speed and the good level of running with our barrels.
And that second winter, how important is that second winter?
It's what I will say, it's a little bit stupid, but we can compare that to the cheese aging, the affinage of cheese. You produce your cheese, and after, with the aging, you will develop a lot of complexity. And the wines in the second winter, at that point, he really develops his complexity. In the first winter, we can say, in the cellar, you have all the process of fermentation, malolactic. The wine is in, we can say, movement. After he stopped all his process, and after you start to have this macro-oxygenation, and you have to have this fining of the wine and this opening of complexity. And we think it's very important to achieve that. After, you must be very careful because if you don't have in the barrel a wine that he has capacity to integrate that, in some vintages, for example, we rack a little bit earlier, or we give a little bit more time to the barrel. It's not a recipe. You have to adapt each year to our climate. Why? Because we have a continental climate, so it means it can change from one year to another very in an important way. But we have also, I have to say, monovarietal wines. So with a climate, a monovarietal wine, each vintage can bring a certain profile of wine, could be different from the other year. It's Burgundy, you will never have, for example, a steady style of each year.
Even the village, you give them a second winter or not?
The village, of course. The village, for example, they start to be bottled. We can say it's the beginning of the winter. We start to bottle some villages in December, but much more of the wine are bottled of village and level in January and beginning February. All the Premier Cru, Grand Cru are bottled in April and we finish in May.
Okay.
To explain. Except one village, Meursault-Narvaux, which is bottled at the same time of the Premier Cru and Grand Cru, so we are end April, beginning of May. because it's a parcel located on the top of the hill for the Narvaux that needs a little bit time to render in the barrel. It's like a wild Mustang. It's a wild animal. You need to be a little bit controlled in the barrels. And Narvaux, it's for the people, they know our Narvaux, they understand what I am talking about. It's a village level appellation, but with a lot of complexity, a lot of length, and a lot of aging potential. But coming back to the Puligny Pucelle, which is one of the great appellations of Puligny. So in Puligny, we produce ourselves les Pucelles, which we are buying in grapes. Les Combettes, we run the vineyards Les Combettes, and after Folatière and Changuin. Changuin, we are running also the vineyards.
And tell me, in 16, was the frost problem big in Pucelle?
In 16, it's a vintage which is harvest and August, and the big problem of the 16 was this: you have a beautiful spring, very beautiful, huh? But end April, in one night, you have a big frost, very low temperature. It starts during 3 days. The first day, the soil starts to, we can say, drop back on a very cool temperature. The soil starts to freeze. First day, second day, and the third day in the night, we have a big shock of temperature. So here, we can say the chance after that you were only in April, so you have the chance. The fruit were coming, the buds were not destroyed. We had fruit, but we have few fruit per vines. So the plant feeds few grapes, like we can say a human being feeding less children. So you have a little bit more food in a certain way. But also, at the end, we have a very beautiful growing season. So 16, happy with the 16, the only problem is very limited production. On the nose, you almost find right now a certain richness on the front nose. If you compare to the Santo Marchatonniere, of course, it's another level of appellation, another level of complexity, but also the vintage has an impact on the front nose.
And the age of the vines here, is it a bit younger?
No, here we are talking about 60 years old vineyards.
Oh, 60, okay. Wow. Would you consider drinking this now? Because it's rich, but you can feel the tension, the tightness, right?
But honestly, if the bottle is open, I will drink it. Huh? Yeah. No, yeah. I would say, to be honest, as those wines, in terms of time, they need 5 years. If you want to enjoy a premier cru to start to open the complexity, you have to wait 5 to 6 years. After, we have a certain style of winemaking made by Eric Germain. The idea of Eric is to not have extraction. So it's a wine that you have pleasure now, but if you wait, you will even have more complexity in the wine. Of course, here it's young, but you bring that, you decant it, you bring that on food, you will enjoy. Of course, very important, the decanting will never have the effect of aging in a bottle. Some people say, yes, you decant and you gain 3-4 years. Technically, they must me explain how you can, in 20 minutes, do a process in the bottles of 4 years. Chemically, I want to understand. Perhaps there are magicians all over the world, but it doesn't work like that. No, the aging in bottle will bring a much more complexity than just an aeration. We have to be clear and to say what is the reality. But of course, this wine, you bring that. For me, it's a wine of going with fish. You can work with cream, but very good with poultry. You have to think about mushrooms, morel. You can talk about here simple some pasta with or eggs. with truffles, and I will be very happy.
What about chicken? Chicken with cream sauce?
Chicken on cream sauce, perfect. It's beautiful nose and always opening. What is very important for Chardonnay? Chardonnay needs oxygen, like all the other varietal, but really to develop, it's very important.
Mm.
Alors, Pucelle, it's one of our very iconic, we can say limited production here. When God is generous, we can produce roughly 4 barrels, but normally we are running a turn of 3 barrels. In this vintage, we produce only 2 barrels.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
And in 18, it will be what, 4?
And Polo, just to say to you, because you are historical partners of the estate, you are one of the few to have access to this wine.
Wow, thank you.
I'm not shining your shoes, I'm just saying the reality.
But in 18 is how many barrels? 2018?
18, we were running
5?
at 4 barrels.
So that's the full capacity.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sorry.
J'ai servi du plan à la bibliothèque hier soir. Qu'est-ce que t'en as fait?
Ah, il est dans le... Ah, sorry Polo. Il est dans les étagères. Exactement où il était, sur les premiers étagères de la bibliothèque. Sorry Polo, just a question.
No problem.
Because we are talking about the Vinothèque, because all those wines are part of the top wine, we are building up a Vinothèque to keep old wines. And yesterday we were moving something, so it was just a request about that.
And you guys have a habit of keeping a bit of back vintages, right? To release to restaurants and special partners.
For example, today we are releasing the wine we are opening now, Meursault Charme. 13 is one of the vintage that we are bringing right now on the market. The idea is to give the possibility. We know that the restaurant have no space. After, it's a question of finance capacity. And I think that to really have the experience of the food and the wine in the restaurant, and really, we can say, respecting the food, is good also to have mature wine when you open the wine.
Yeah.
We are not talking about very old wine, but we are talking about wines that have already 5 years bottled. So we are doing that.
No, I think it's a great idea because the problem is people are drinking their whites way too young. But that also has the issue of pre-mox in some of the Burgundy wines. I mean, people are just afraid to age the wine because they don't know how well it ages, so they just rather drink them, quite young.
Yeah, but now those are opening the 2013 Meursault Charme. It's like a young baby on the because you have to think one very important thing: the style of our wines, the idea of Eric having a maturity. We must achieve the maturity, phenolic, etc. But we must keep a lot of acidity in the wine. The backbone of the wine will be the acidity. After making no extraction, you keep this freshness and you keep also life in the bottle, aging potentiality. Of course, if you make a big wine, extract it over alcohol, so less acidity, you will have a lot of pressure in the first year, but the wine will decline very fast. So the idea is to keep this typicity, but much more to avoid any, we can say, manipulation in the winemaking process that will cover the origin of the soil. So the idea is to be transparent, and this transparency brings this kind of wine. After, on the front nose, if you smell, you have a little bit of mushrooms, like mushroom nose, very fine. A lot of spice, like white pepper also. It's like a wave of energy.
I mean, you know, being Charm, I think it's a bit more generous, but then I think the vintage keeps it relatively tight. I think I
Alors,
quite enjoy these 13 wines. I mean, yes, we understand 17 is great, 14 is great, and 10 is great, but some of these 13 have real characters.
13, I totally agree with you. Right now, we are selling 13. A lot of restaurants are calling us back to have this wine in 13, Puligny Combat in 13. Why? It was a difficult vintage. It was one of the very late vintage, and we finished to harvest the 8th of October. If today you said to a grower, we are going to harvest in October, you look like a young grower. No, October, it's almost Christmas, in a certain way. But coming back, it was a very late, so we have our full spring. Spring 13 was one of the most awful spring with rain, cold, everything. After we have in July, hailstorm, boom. So we have horrible spring, horrible this problem of July, but after the end of growing season was perfect. And I would say, you don't have the concentration of the 15, but you have a lot of purity, length, and 13 for me, in terms of gastronomic, opening a bottle of 13 today, in whites, but also in reds. The people make a good sorting of the grapes, keep the best grapes of the harvest. The 13 reds are very interesting because they are soft tannin. You really enjoy the wine. Coming back to the wine also, when you say it's clean and not the big charm, it's also due to the origin of the parcel. This is also a component of the style of this wine because Charme, it's the biggest climate premier cru of Meursault. It's 31 hectares, so it's huge. But this Charme came from Calmis. Calmis in Old French means rocky plateau. So it's rocky soil on the hill where you grow cereal. So this was soil directed to vineyards. So coming to that, this Charme is divided in two lieux-dits under sectors. So you have Charme dessous, lower part, and Charme dessus above, which is just at the limit with Puligny Combat, at the same level. Here we are at the same level of the Puligny Pucelle we taste, 250 meters, east orientation. But here we are on the upper part of the Charme, much more stony. So you have always a round Charme, but much more balanced. For that is a Charme very interesting for gastronomy, because you have richness, but tension in the same time. Very important for this wine.
How different, you know, is the soil from dessus and dessous?
But in dessous, you have more lime, you have more clay. It will be a soil which is more, it's marl, but with a concentration of clay more important compared to the upper part. So you will have, because of the clay, on the Charme dessous, on the front palate, a wine a little bit more large, rich, opulent in a certain way. And the Meursault, very important for all you are attending now. A lot of people, when they talk about Meursault, they always think that the Meursault are rich, buttery. It's right for some parcel of Meursault, but it's not right for all the Meursault territory. All the territory, if you take, for example, the top appellation of Meursault, Meursault Perrières, it's just question of elegance. It's not question of body, richness. So if you imagine that the best wine of Meursault, considered as the Grand Cru of Meursault, is Perrières, is nothing to do with the style of rich, bodied wine. It's much more of a style of being round but precise. And here on the lens, on the Meursault Charme, you have a lot of these citrusy notes, a lot of length and no end. You have always this, it's like being in front of the sea and you have the wave coming one after one.
I think there's something about these, late harvest vintage that stretches the wine. I mean, it makes it feel like it takes more time and it will evolve more slowly and gradually. So, I'm really beginning to enjoy the 13s more and more whenever I come across these bottles.
You are totally right. In the cold vintages, wine needs a little bit more in bottle to open, which is normal. You have the fermentation are not as fast in terms of alcohol. You have not the same balance between acidity and alcohol, and those wines they have this tension that needs a little bit time to make them open. But at my opinion, after it's my type of taste, but I prefer the classical vintages because you have the purity, you have the tension, and it's what we like in our wines. For example, if in Burgundy you ask to somebody, you want a 2003 vintage or a 2004 vintage for whites, no question, people will take 2004 systematically.
Yeah.
Without having no question. Of course, 2003 was a beautiful vintage in a certain way, but it's too big in the other hand. And you lose after the problematic in our Burgundy is when you have a very warm vintages, the varietal start to cover the origin of the terroir.
The soil.
So you will have a beautiful Chardonnay, a beautiful Pinot Noir, and you will lose the essence of the terroir and what is the originality of our region. It's like with the reds. For example, in 15, Eric made all the harvest of reds in all cluster. And we noticed that in Côte de Beaune, using the whole cluster technique for the fermentation of the reds, it has a way of covering in a certain dimension the origin of the terroir. We are not on the same soil compared to the Côte de Nuit, where in Côte de Nuit you work in all cluster, you keep the identity. Here our soil are different. So from this experience, we moved back to keep some old cluster in some, for example, in Volnay-Centenot, Pommard-et-Penaud, Volnay-Champagne, Volnay-Piture, Corton-Perrière, but all the rest we distem now.
Okay.
So you have to really adapt your technique to what type of soil and what is the raw material. We are like, how to say, we are making wine with grapes, and we are not magicians. You have the raw material of quality, you will create a great wine.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left before they cut us off. So if you have any questions, please ask. But Marco, if there are no questions, why don't you end with a comment, a little bit of comment about 2019 vintage, 2020 vintage. How is the growing season?
The growing season is perfect. We have it was very funny. This was the top spring since 20 years, and everybody was closed at home. It's strange. You imagine all the bars, terrace, it could be a very beautiful thing. So a beautiful spring, no rain. By chance, last week and this week, we have a little bit rain because the soil, we have a dry winter. So a dry winter with a dry spring can be very difficult in the end of the growing season. We can face hydrical stress, but now we have rain, no disease. We had no hail. We have last week a mix of hail and rain, but it was very fine, so no damage. If everything go in a perfect way, we will harvest 25th of August. Nowadays we are talking about 25th of August, and with a good production. It will be generous. And now we have some wind, so we have the rain, the wind, so we have no disease.
So it's still early.
This year, yes, but more and more we are going to harvest end of August, beginning of September.
Yeah.
We can say since 10 years, we have almost 4 weeks in advance. When you imagine the last wine we taste, the Meursault 13, we start to harvest, it was the 25th of September. When we
1
are
month
now,
before.
last year's starting the 25th of August. There is really 1 month in difference if you compare.
And will there be a shortage of pickers, you think, all across Europe because of the travel restrictions?
It was the discussion we had today, because we are starting to prepare with restaurants to bring the food as they cannot. You have to imagine that we are harvesting more than the 33 hectares we are working, because we also harvest some vineyards of the partners we are buying grapes. In total, we harvest 55 hectares last year. 55 hectares with our team. So it means we need, in total, with the drivers, with everybody, it's 140 people.
Wow.
So you have to bring 140 people. So since last year, 90 people were in restaurants. The rest was in 2 teams here in the winery to eat here, because we have the space. And now the restaurant cannot bring more than 40 people in terms of space. So we have the garage where we have all the press, all the material for the harvest is empty. Normally is a nightclub after the harvest, and now we will become a restaurant before becoming a nightclub. So we have already found the tables, everything, and now there was a discussion. If the borders are closed, I'm sure that the governments will work in order to have like authorization for the agriculture, because it's not only us in the vineyards. You have to think about all the fruit, all the other agricultural things that need handwork. So normally we work with since years with a Polish team from Poland.
Yeah.
So they are coming here. There are 70 to 80 people to pick, so only on the picking, and we cross fingers to have them. It is already confirmed, but we don't know what will happen in the next 2 months.
Okay, well, I wish you the best of luck. I hope we'll be able to see each other in person in the coming months, maybe after harvest now, because it doesn't seem like we'll be traveling to each other's place in the summer. So please say hello to everybody at the winery. Say hi to Eric, and thank you so much for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you for organizing all that, Polo, and thank you for all the team of Altaya and all those attending, and enjoy life, because
all
life
right.
is...
Okay, see you. Thank you, Marco.
Kisses. Take well care of you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.